When Everett Blackwood found the blood-soaked woman caught in his winter trapline, her desperate eyes locked onto his as she whispered, "Please help me find my daughter." Nothing in his 3 years of mountain solitude had prepared him for the horrifying truth behind her child's disappearance, or the dangerous men who would kill to keep their experimental facility's secrets buried beneath the snow. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The wind carried the promise of more snow as Everett Blackwood trudged through the deep drifts, checking his trapline. Winter had come early to the mountains this year, harsh and unforgiving, just the way he preferred it. 3 years since he'd retreated to this remote cabin. 3 years since he'd chosen solitude over the chaos of what people called civilization. His breath clouded before him as he moved with practiced efficiency, his weathered hands checking each trap with mechanical precision. The rabbit snare was empty, but the fox trap had yielded results. A beautiful red specimen with a coat that would fetch a good price come spring if he ever decided to venture into town again. Everett knelt in the snow, his beard catching tiny ice crystals as he worked. He respected these creatures, never wasted what they provided. It wasn't their fault they'd wandered into his domain. The storm was picking up as he approached the final trap along the eastern ridge. From 50 yards away, he knew something was wrong. Movement where there shouldn't be any. Something large thrashing weakly against the fresh powder. His rifle was in his hands before conscious thought, years of mountain living having honed his instincts to a razor's edge. "Who's there?" he called, voice rough from disuse. No one should be up this high, not in this weather, not on his mountain. The movement stilled. As Everett approached cautiously, the sight before him froze his blood colder than the mountain air. Not an animal. A woman. She was crumpled half in, half out of his trapline, a crude spring snare meant for coyotes. The metal hadn't closed on her, thank God, but she'd clearly fallen trying to avoid it. Blood stained the snow beneath her, too much blood. Her face was pale, dark hair matted with ice and dirt, clothes torn and inadequate for the bitter cold. One leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and her breathing came in ragged, shallow gasps. Everett stood motionless, shock rooting him to the spot. A human, here, his sanctuary violated by this half-dead stranger. Her eyes fluttered open, clouded with pain but startlingly alert. Deep brown, like the rich earth beneath the snow. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other. The mountain recluse and the broken woman, two impossibilities colliding in the wilderness. "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible over the howling wind. "My daughter." Then her eyes rolled back, consciousness fleeing, leaving Everett with an unconscious woman bleeding into his trapline and a decision he never wanted to make. He could leave her. The storm would cover her by morning. No one would know. His isolation would remain intact. The mountain kept secrets well. Instead, he found himself slinging his rifle over his shoulder, crouching down to gather her broken form into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of bones and fading warmth. As he lifted her, something fell from her clutched hand, a small, worn photograph. Everett scooped it up without looking and tucked it into his pocket. The trek back to his cabin was arduous, the woman a dead weight in his arms, the snow now falling so heavily he could barely see 3 feet ahead. His muscles burned with the effort, but he pressed on, guided by instinct and the knowledge of every tree and boulder on his mountain. The cabin appeared through the whiteout like a mirage, solid logs and a smoking chimney, the only sign of human existence for 20 miles in any direction. Everett shouldered through the door, ducking to avoid the low frame, and deposited the woman carefully onto his bed, the only proper piece of furniture he owned. In the warm glow of the oil lamps, he could better assess the damage. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe early 30s. Her face, though smudged with dirt and blood, held a quiet dignity even in unconsciousness. The leg was definitely broken, and a deep gash ran along her side. Hypothermia had set in. Without immediate care, she wouldn't last the night. Everett worked methodically, cutting away the sodden clothing, cleaning wounds, setting the broken leg with practiced hands that had mended his own injuries more times than he could count. No doctor, but the mountains taught you to be self-sufficient or die. He'd seen enough broken bodies in his former life to know what to do. As he wrapped her in clean blankets and stoked the fire to a roaring blaze, questions ricocheted through his mind. Who was she? What was she doing on his mountain, miles from any trail? And what had she meant about her daughter? The photograph. He pulled it from his pocket, now damp from snow. A little girl smiled back at him, no more than 6 or 7, with the same dark eyes as the woman. On the back, written in smudged ink, Emma, age 6, Timber Creek Falls. Everett's stomach clenched. There was no child with her, no tracks besides her own on the ridge. The woman stirred as he tucked the blankets around her, her eyes opening briefly, unfocused and bright with fever. "Emma," she murmured, "I was so close. The map." "Don't try to talk," Everett said, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears after so many months of silence. "You're safe." A bitter laugh escaped her cracked lips. "No one's safe." Her hand clutched at his sleeve with surprising strength. "Please, she's out there. My little girl. They took her." "Who took her?" Everett asked, but she was slipping away again, consciousness fleeing. "The people at Timber Creek Lodge," she whispered. "Said she needed special care, but they're lying. Experiments. I found proof." Her eyes locked onto his, suddenly clear and desperate. "Map in my pack, please." Then she was out again, breathing shallow but steady. Everett found her backpack soaked through and torn, still tangled in the trapline. Inside was a sealed, waterproof case containing a map of the region, his region, with markings he didn't recognize, circling an area about 10 miles north. Notes in the margins, coordinates, and a facility he'd never heard of, Timber Creek Research Station. Everett spread the map on his table, studied it by lamplight as the storm raged outside. Nothing should be there. He knew these mountains like he knew his own scarred hands. That valley was empty, just wilderness. Yet as the woman mumbled in fevered sleep behind him, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He'd come to these mountains to escape the evils of humanity, to build a life of solitude and simple survival. He wanted no part of this woman's troubles, wanted nothing to do with missing children or mysterious research stations. But the mountains had their own code of honor, and somewhere, if the woman was to be believed, a child named Emma was in danger. Everett Blackwood stared out the frosted window into the howling blizzard, a decision forming like ice in his veins. Tomorrow, when the storm cleared, he would have to venture into the one place on his mountain he'd never explored. For tonight, though, his duty was clear: keep the woman alive. Come morning, get answers. He settled into his chair, rifle across his knees, and prepared for a long night of watching and waiting, the boundaries of his carefully constructed solitude crumbling around him with each labored breath from the stranger in his bed. Dawn broke reluctantly, pale fingers of light struggling through the still falling snow. Everett hadn't slept, his vigil unbroken through the night as the woman cycled between restless unconsciousness and brief, delirious moments of wakefulness. Her fever had spiked around midnight, her skin burning beneath his touch as he'd placed cool cloths on her forehead. The storm had shown no mercy, howling against the cabin walls like a living thing desperate to get inside. When the first grey light filtered through the frost-covered windows, Everett rose stiffly from his chair. His joints protested the movement after hours of stillness. The fire had burned low, and he added fresh logs, watching the flames catch and grow before turning his attention back to his unexpected guest. She was finally sleeping peacefully, her breathing deeper and more regular. The fever had broken sometime before dawn. She would live, at least for now. Everett approached the bed cautiously, studying her face in the new light. Clean of dirt and blood, her features were striking, not conventionally beautiful perhaps, but compelling. There was character in the slight furrow between her brows, determination in the set of her jaw, even in sleep. This was a woman who had endured, who had fought. He recognized the signs because he wore them himself. On impulse, he reached for the photograph again. The little girl, Emma, had the same stubborn chin, the same dark eyes that seemed to look beyond the camera to something only she could see. 6 years old, out there somewhere. If the woman's fevered ramblings were to be believed, Everett turned the photo over in his hands. Timber Creek Falls. He knew the place. A tourist spot about 30 miles down the mountain, popular in summer for its picturesque cascades. But there was no research station there, no lodge, nothing but wilderness beyond the small viewing area where visitors took their photographs before returning to the comfort of their cars. Yet the map told a different story. The markings showed a facility nestled deep in the northern valley, away from any roads or trails, in a section of the mountain range that was particularly rugged and unwelcoming. If something was hidden there, it would be well concealed indeed. A soft moan from the bed drew his attention. The woman was waking, her eyes fluttering open, clear now and alert. She tried to sit up, grimaced with pain, then noticed him standing nearby. For a moment, confusion clouded her face, followed by a flash of fear that she quickly masked. "You're the man from the woods," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "You helped me?" Everett nodded once, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her tone. "Found you in my trapline, brought you here." She glanced around the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings, the neatly organized supplies, the weapons mounted on the walls. Her gaze lingered on the exit, measuring the distance, assessing. "I'm not going to hurt you," Everett said, recognizing the calculation in her eyes. "But you're in no condition to leave. Broken leg, deep cut in your side, storm's still going." She relaxed marginally, wincing as she shifted position. "Thank you for saving my life." Everett shrugged, moving to the stove where a pot of coffee was beginning to percolate. "Anyone would have." "No," she said softly, "they wouldn't. Not up here, not for someone like me." He poured 2 mugs of the strong black coffee, handed one to her, and settled back into his chair. "You have a name?" Catherine Reeves." She accepted the coffee with a grateful nod, wrapping her fingers around the warm mug. "And you are?" "Everett Blackwood, the hermit of Hollow Ridge," she said with a hint of a smile. "People in town talk about you." Everett frowned. He'd done his best to become a ghost, a legend, something people dismissed as an old wives' tale. Apparently, he hadn't been successful enough. "What were you doing on my mountain, Catherine Reeves?" he asked, not bothering to hide his suspicion. "In a blizzard, miles from any trail, near my trapline." Her smile faded. She took a sip of coffee, buying time, assessing him, making a decision. "Looking for my daughter," she finally said. She nodded toward his pocket, where the photograph was still visible. "I see you found her picture." Everett pulled out the photo, handed it to her. She took it with trembling fingers, thumb brushing over the child's face with such tenderness that Everett had to look away. "Emma," she whispered, "my beautiful girl." "You said someone took her," Everett prompted. "In your fever, you mentioned Timber Creek and experiments." Catherine's head snapped up, eyes suddenly wary. "What else did I say?" "Not much. Something about a map, proof." He gestured to the table where the map lay open. "Found that in your pack." She struggled to sit up straighter, grimacing with the effort. "I need to see it." Reluctantly, Everett brought the map to the bed, spreading it beside her. Catherine traced the markings with her finger, focused despite her obvious pain. "They told me she was dead," she said quietly. A hiking accident last summer. Said they found her body in a ravine. Too damaged for me to view. Closed casket funeral. Her voice cracked. I buried an empty coffin. Everett remained silent, letting her continue at her own pace. I would have believed them, except she reached inside the blanket wrapped around her shoulders and pulled out a small wooden doll, crudely made but lovingly detailed with yarn hair and a patchwork dress. This was in my mailbox 3 weeks ago. No note, no explanation, just Emma's doll, the one she was carrying when she disappeared. Everett studied the doll, handmade, old, the kind of toy that became an extension of a child. Someone wanted you to know she's alive, he concluded. Catherine nodded. I started digging. Emma had a heart condition, nothing severe, but she needed medication. I checked with her specialist, and he mentioned a clinical trial he'd recommended her for at Timber Creek Research Station, except I never approved any trial, never even heard of the place. She tapped the map. The doctor gave me the general location, said it was a cutting-edge pediatric facility. When I tried to contact them officially, I hit walls. No record of Emma, no acknowledgement she was ever there. But I found a former nurse who worked there briefly. She slipped me information, patient logs with Emma's name, coordinates, security protocols. Her eyes hardened. And reports of experimental treatments on children, unauthorized by parents. Everett's jaw tightened. So you came up here alone, in winter, to find this place? I had to, she said simply. Wouldn't you? The question hung between them, unanswerable. Everett hadn't cared about another human being in years, had deliberately cultivated that emptiness within himself. It was safer that way. I was close, Catherine continued, frustration evident in her voice. The storm hit faster than predicted. I got disoriented, fell down that slope. She shook her head. I was so stupid, so unprepared. Now I've lost more time and Emma is still there. Everett finished for her. If she's been there for months, a few more days won't change things. You don't know that, Catherine snapped, then immediately softened. I'm sorry. You saved my life. I have no right to— You're right, I don't know, he interrupted. But I do know you're not going anywhere on that leg for at least a week, and the storm won't let up until tomorrow, according to the barometer. She looked ready to argue, then sagged back against the pillow, defeat written in the lines of her face. A week might be too late. Everett stood abruptly, uncomfortable with the emotions stirring within him, emotions he'd thought long buried. Get some rest. We'll figure it out when the storm passes. He moved to the door, grabbing his heavy coat. Where are you going? Catherine asked. To check the traps. We'll need food. He paused, hand on the latch. And to think. Outside, in the swirling snow, Everett took his first deep breath since finding Catherine Reeves in his trapline. The cold air burned his lungs, a welcome pain that cleared his head. He had a choice to make. Help this woman find her child and risk everything he'd built here, or send her away once she could travel. It should have been an easy decision. His solitude was hard-won, his peace carefully constructed from the ruins of his former life. He owed this woman nothing beyond the basic humanity he'd already shown. Yet, as he trudged through the deepening snow, the image of the little girl's face haunted him. Emma, 6 years old and alone in a place that used children for experiments. Somewhere beneath the ice he'd built around his heart, something dangerous began to thaw. The storm finally broke on the third day, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white drifts and ice-laden trees that sparkled in the weak winter sunlight. Inside the cabin, an uneasy routine had developed between Everett and Catherine. He tended her wounds with the same silent efficiency he applied to all tasks. Changing bandages, checking the splint on her leg, preparing simple but nourishing meals. She, in turn, respected his space as much as possible, limiting conversation to necessary exchanges, watching him with those perceptive dark eyes that seemed to see more than he wanted to reveal. But as the weather cleared, the unspoken question hung between them. What now? Everett stood at the window, gazing out at the blinding white expanse. His breath fogged the glass as he contemplated the mountain ridges visible in the distance. Somewhere beyond those peaks was the facility marked on Catherine's map, the facility where her daughter might be held. "You're planning something," Catherine said from the bed, breaking the silence. She had gained strength over the past days. The fever completely gone now, though the broken leg would keep her immobilized for weeks. Everett turned to face her. "I'm going to check out this place on your map." Her eyes widened. "You believe me? I believe something's there that shouldn't be," he replied carefully. "Whether it's what you think, whether your daughter—" He left the sentence unfinished. "I'm coming with you," she said immediately, struggling to sit up straighter. Everett shook his head. "Not possible. That leg won't carry you 10 feet, let alone 10 miles through deep snow." "Then I'll crawl," she retorted, a fierce determination hardening her features. "She's my daughter, and you'll die before you reach her," Everett said bluntly. "I can move faster alone. Scout the area, see what we're dealing with." Catherine stared at him, conflict evident in her expression. Finally, she reached beneath her pillow and pulled out a small leather pouch. From it, she extracted a key card with no markings and a folded paper. "The nurse who helped me," she explained, holding them out to him. "Security access and a partial layout of the facility. Lower levels are restricted. That's where she thought they were keeping the children." Everett took the items, examining the schematic carefully. The facility was larger than he'd expected, built partially into the mountainside for concealment. Multiple entry points, but only one that might be manageable for a single person without setting off alarms. "Why would you trust me with this?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "You don't know me." Catherine's gaze was steady. "Because you could have left me to die in that trap, but you didn't, because you've had 3 days to hurt me if that was your intention. But instead, you've healed me. And because," she hesitated, "there's grief in your eyes too, the kind that comes from losing someone." Everett looked away sharply. 3 years of isolation, and this woman had seen through him in days. It was unsettling. "I'll leave at first light," he said, changing the subject. "Take supplies for 3 days, if I'm not back by then." "You will be," she said with quiet confidence. "With information, at least." That night, as Catherine slept, Everett prepared methodically. His military training, long unused but never forgotten, surfaced as he laid out weapons, supplies, communications equipment. The satellite phone he'd kept for emergencies but never used was charged and packed. He studied the map until every contour, every marked security point was committed to memory. As he worked, his mind kept returning to Catherine's words. "Grief in your eyes." She wasn't wrong. The mountains had been his escape, his penance, his tomb for a past he couldn't change. Now, this woman and her missing child were pulling him back into a world he'd rejected, forcing him to care again when caring had cost him everything once before. Before dawn, Everett was ready. He checked on Catherine, finding her awake, watching him in the dim light. "I've left food within reach," he told her. "Water too. Fires stocked to last until evening. You'll need to add logs after that." She nodded. "I'll manage." An awkward silence fell between them. Everett shouldered his pack, adjusted his rifle. "Everett," Catherine said softly, "thank you, no matter what you find." He paused at the door. "Don't thank me yet." The journey north was grueling, even for someone accustomed to the harsh mountain terrain. The fresh snow reached mid-thigh in places, and the temperature had dropped further overnight, turning the air sharp as glass in his lungs. Everett moved steadily, conserving energy, using natural ridges and tree lines for cover out of habit. By midday, he'd reached a vantage point overlooking the valley marked on Catherine's map. He dropped to his stomach in the snow, pulling out binoculars to survey the area below. At first glance, there was nothing, just an untouched wilderness of snow-covered forest and frozen streams. But as he panned slowly across the valley, he caught it, a subtle wrongness in the tree line, a too-perfect arrangement of boulders near the cliff face. Artificial camouflage. Everett narrowed his focus. There, a metal door set into the rock, almost invisible against the stone. A security camera disguised as a crevice, and footprints, fresh ones, partially obscured by snow, but clearly showing regular patrols. The facility existed. Catherine hadn't been delusional or desperate. Something was hidden in this valley, something that required heavy security and absolute secrecy. Moving with the silent precision that had once been his professional hallmark, Everett worked his way down the slope, staying within the tree cover. As he drew closer, more details emerged. Ventilation systems disguised as natural rock formations. Power lines buried but traceable by the slight depression in the snow. The occasional glint of a security sensor, nearly invisible to an untrained eye. He circled the perimeter, mapping entry points, patrol patterns, security measures, military grade, but not impenetrable, not for someone with his background. As dusk approached, Everett positioned himself near what appeared to be a service entrance. Two guards emerged, lighting cigarettes despite the biting cold, their breath and smoke mingling in the frigid air. "Another supply run tomorrow?" one asked, stamping his feet against the cold. "Yeah, medical supplies mostly," the other replied. "Doc says the procedures on the new batch are starting next week. Those poor kids, gives me the creeps, what they're doing down there. Pays good though. And it's not like we're the ones cutting them open." Everett's blood ran cold. He'd seen many atrocities in his former life, perpetrated in the name of security, progress, the greater good. But children, a line even he had never crossed. The guards finished their cigarettes and retreated inside. Everett waited until full darkness before approaching the door. The keycard Catherine had provided might work, but using it would alert security to an unauthorized entry. He needed more information before attempting infiltration. He rigged a small, unobtrusive camera near the service entrance, angled to capture anyone entering or exiting. It would transmit to a receiver with limited range. He would need to return to this spot to collect the data, but it would give him intelligence on schedules, personnel, potential weaknesses. Night had fully descended by the time Everett began the journey back to the cabin. His mind worked furiously, processing what he'd learned, formulating and discarding plans. The facility was real. The experiments on children might be real. But was Emma there? Was she still alive? And if she was, how could one broken man and an injured woman possibly extract her from a fortified research station? The questions followed him through the darkness, accompanied by the memory of Catherine's eyes, eyes that had seen his grief and still trusted him with her most precious hope, eyes that would demand answers when he returned. For the first time in 3 years, Everett Blackwood found himself praying, not to any god he recognized, but to whatever forces might still grant mercy in a world he'd found largely merciless, that he would not have to destroy this woman as he'd once been destroyed. In the distance, his cabin's single window glowed with firelight, a beacon calling him back to complications he'd never wanted and responsibilities he'd thought forever abandoned. Catherine was awake when he returned, her posture tense with anticipation. She'd managed to prop herself up against the wall, the wooden doll clutched in her hands like a talisman. When Everett pushed through the door, snow dusting his shoulders and beard, her eyes immediately sought his, searching for answers before he could speak. "It's there," he said simply, shrugging off his pack and hanging his rifle on the hooks by the door. "Hidden, but there." She exhaled shakily, relief and fear mingling in her expression. "And Emma, did you see any children?" Everett shook his head, moving to the stove to warm his hands. "Didn't get inside, but I overheard guards talking. They mentioned procedures on a new batch starting next week." He hesitated, then added, "They specifically said kids." Catherine closed her eyes briefly, her fingers tightening around the doll. When she opened them again, they burned with a fierce intensity. Then she could still be there, still alive. "Possible," Everett conceded, keeping his tone measured. Hope was dangerous in situations like this. He'd seen what it could do to people when it was crushed. "I set up surveillance on one entrance. Going back tomorrow to collect data, see if I can identify patterns, weaknesses." He moved to the table, unfolding Catherine's map and adding new markings based on what he'd observed. "The facility is larger than it appears on this schematic, extends further into the mountain. Security is tight, but not impenetrable. Military grade, but not military personnel. Private contractors would be my guess." Catherine watched him work, her medical training allowing her to recognize the precise, methodical approach of someone with tactical experience. "You were military," she said, not a question. Everett's hand paused briefly over the map. "Once. Special forces?" His jaw tightened. "Something like that." "That's why you're up here, isn't it?" She pressed gently. "Something happened, something you're running from." Everett straightened, his expression closing like a door slammed shut. "We're not talking about me. We're talking about getting your daughter back, if she's there." Catherine held his gaze steadily. "I need to know who I'm trusting with my child's life." The logic was sound, but it didn't make the request any easier to bear. Everett moved to the cabin's single window, staring out at the snow-covered landscape, now bathed in moonlight. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken histories. "I was part of a specialized extraction team," he finally said, voice low. "Hostage rescue, primarily. High-risk operations, civilian targets in hostile territory. I was good at it." His reflection in the glass looked like a ghost, a remnant of someone long dead. "Or until I wasn't." Catherine waited, giving him space to continue on his own terms. 3 years ago, Chechnya. Intelligence reported a group of aid workers held by separatists. My team went in." His voice had flattened, professional, detached. Intel was wrong. It wasn't separatists. It was a local warlord working with government forces. We weren't expected. Walking into a trap, but a different kind than we'd prepared for. He turned from the window, his eyes meeting hers but seeing something else, somewhere else. They'd wired the building, used the hostages as bait. I got suspicious when the security pattern didn't match our briefing, ordered a halt, but command overruled me, sent us in anyway. Catherine's expression softened with understanding. It was a massacre. Everett nodded once. 27 civilians, all of my team except me. I was checking the perimeter when the charges detonated. His hand unconsciously moved to his side, where Catherine now realized a significant scar must lie beneath his clothing. Afterward, I learned the operation was compromised from the beginning. Someone higher up had political interests in the region, used us as pawns. "So you disappeared," Catherine concluded. "Came here to get away from it all." I testified at a closed hearing. Names were named, careers ended. Then I walked away before they could bury the evidence, and me with it. A bitter smile touched his lips. The mountain doesn't lie, doesn't betray, kills you honestly if it kills you at all. Catherine absorbed this, connecting the fragments to form a clearer picture of the man before her. "And now I'm asking you to risk everything again. To trust my information, my cause. The difference," Everett said quietly, "is that this time I'm choosing it. No orders, No chain of command, just my decision. He returned to the table, focusing again on the map. Based on what I saw today, I believe I can get inside. The security key card you have might work on certain doors. If your daughter is there, there's a chance, a small one, that I can find her. And get her out, Catherine pressed. Oh, one problem at a time, Everett replied. First, we confirm she's there, then we plan extraction. Catherine shook her head. No, we plan for both possibilities now. I won't have you find her only to leave her there because we didn't think through the escape. Everett raised an eyebrow at her use of we, but didn't comment on it. Instead, he pulled out a small notebook and began sketching. The facility has 3 visible entry points. The main entrance is heavily guarded, multiple checkpoints. Service entrance has lighter security, but regular traffic. There's a third access here. He indicated a spot on the mountain face above the facility. Looks like emergency evacuation route. Minimal surveillance. Probably alarmed. Catherine leaned forward as much as her injured leg would allow. The nurse mentioned a medical evacuation protocol. Helicopter pad on the roof for emergencies. Everett nodded. Saw it. Covered now, but the landing zone is clear of snow. They keep it maintained. So we have options, Catherine said, a hint of hope coloring her voice. We have possibilities, Everett corrected. It's a big difference. He continued working on the plan deep into the night, Catherine contributing details from her conversations with the nurse, both of them focused on the impossible task ahead. When Catherine finally drifted to sleep, exhausted from pain and emotion, Everett remained at the table, staring at the doll she had placed beside the map. It was crudely made, but crafted with obvious love, the kind of thing a parent makes when store-bought toys aren't an option. The yarn hair had been carefully stitched, the patchwork dress detailed with tiny embroidered flowers. A treasured possession for a young child. Everett picked it up, turning it over in his scarred hands. Children had never been part of his life's equation. In his former profession, they were either potential collateral damage to be avoided or hostages to be extracted. Tactical considerations, not individuals. He'd never allowed himself to think of them as anything more. But something about this doll, about Catherine's unwavering determination to find her child despite impossible odds, stirred memories he'd long suppressed. His own mother, before the drinking took her, sewing patches on his worn clothes, the single Christmas present he'd received as a boy, a carved wooden horse his father had made during a rare sober period. The capacity for love, even in the most desperate circumstances. The need to create something meaningful in a world that often seemed meaningless. Carefully, Everett set the doll back on the table. Tomorrow he would return to the facility, gather more intelligence, and formulate a plan that might get them all killed. Tonight, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection on what they were fighting for, not just a child's life, but the very idea that some things in this world were worth saving. Dawn was just breaking when Catherine awoke to find Everett gearing up by the door, checking weapons and equipment with practiced efficiency. "You're leaving already?" she asked, voice still rough with sleep. He nodded. "You'd need to get to the observation point before shift change. Best chance to identify key personnel." Catherine pushed herself up, wincing at the pain in her leg. "Everett!" she called as he reached for the door. "Last night, you said this was your choice. Why? Why help us when you could just send me away once I can travel?" Everett paused, his hand on the latch. For a moment, he seemed to be considering the question himself, searching for an answer that made sense. "Because some debts can't be paid," he finally said. "But we try anyway." Then he was gone, swallowed by the pale morning light and the endless white of the mountain, leaving Catherine to wonder which debts he was trying to settle and to whom. The surveillance footage revealed more than Everett had dared hope. Over 18 hours, his hidden camera captured the comings and goings at the service entrance. Supply deliveries, shift changes, security protocols. Most valuable were the glimpses of the interior each time the door opened. Corridors, security stations, staff movements, like pieces of a puzzle gradually forming a complete picture. By the time he returned to the cabin late that night, Everett had compiled a mental catalogue of critical intelligence. Catherine was still awake, her face lighting up with nervous anticipation as he entered. "Tell me," she demanded immediately. Everett shed his outer layers, hanging them methodically by the door before joining her at the table where she'd managed to position herself in his absence. Her injured leg was propped on a chair, but she sat upright now, stronger than days before. "The facility operates in 3 shifts, he began, pulling out his notebook. "The security rotates every 8 hours. Minimal staffing from midnight to 6 a.m. Skeleton crew, mostly monitoring systems." He sketched as he spoke, creating a rough timeline. Supply trucks arrive Tuesday and Friday mornings. Medical deliveries come separately. Smaller vehicle, different driver, that's tomorrow. Catherine leaned forward, hope and fear warring in her expression. "And the children, did you see any sign?" Everett hesitated. "No visual confirmation, but I intercepted radio communications. They referenced subjects being moved for assessment from the lower levels to the medical wing." His jaw tightened. "They used numbers, not names." Catherine's hands clenched into fists, like they're not even human, like they're experiments. "That's exactly what they are to these people," Everett confirmed grimly. "Oh, but there's something else." He reached into his pack and withdrew a small plastic bag containing a brightly colored hair ribbon. "Found this near the service entrance, caught in the door jamb. Someone small enough to miss it." Catherine took the bag with trembling hands, examining the ribbon. It was pink with tiny embroidered butterflies, worn and faded. This looks like Emma's," she whispered. "She had ribbons like this. I would braid her hair every morning before school." Her eyes filled with tears. "It could be hers." "Could be," Everett agreed, careful not to fuel false hope, "or another child's, but it confirms children have been through that entrance recently." Catherine clutched the bag to her chest. "She's there. I know she is." She looked up at him, determination hardening her features. "How do we get her out?" Everett unfolded a larger piece of paper where he'd sketched a more detailed layout of the facility based on his observations. "Medical delivery tomorrow. Driver is alone. Minimal security check at the gate. They're expecting routine supplies. If I can intercept the vehicle before it reaches the facility, you could pose as the driver," Catherine finished, following his logic. He nodded. "And to get inside, locate the medical wing. Based on the schedule I observed, they bring children up from the lower levels for examination around 10 a.m. If Emma is part of that group, you could get her during transport," Catherine said, excitement building in her voice. "When she'd be outside whatever containment they're keeping her in." "Possibly," Everett cautioned. "It's still high risk. Multiple security checkpoints, armed guards, surveillance cameras, one man against an entire facility." Catherine's expression fell slightly. "If I could come with you—" "You can't," he interrupted firmly. "Not with that leg. And even if you could, it would only complicate extraction." His tone softened at her crestfallen look. "I work better alone. Always have." She nodded reluctantly. "So what's the full plan?" Everett outlined it methodically. Intercept the medical delivery vehicle, subdue the driver, use his credentials to enter the facility, locate Emma during the morning medical transport, create a diversion if necessary, then extract her through the service entrance during the resulting confusion, use the forest for cover during escape, then make it back to the cabin before they could organize a proper search. "It's not elegant," he admitted. "Too many variables, too many things that could go wrong. But sometimes simple is better than complex. Fewer moving parts to fail. Catherine studied the plan, her medical training allowing her to understand the tactical thinking behind it. And if she's not part of the group brought up tomorrow? Everett met her gaze directly. Then I abort. Come back. We try something else. She nodded, accepting the limitations. And if you're caught, I won't be, he said flatly. Catherine's expression told him she recognized the evasion, but wouldn't press further. They both knew the stakes. Capture would mean death, or worse, depending on how desperate the facility was to keep its secrets. I should leave before dawn, Everett said, checking his watch. Delivery is scheduled for 7:30. I need to be in position well before then. Catherine reached across the table, her hand covering his. The contact was unexpected, startling in its warmth after years of isolation. I wish I could help more. I hate putting all this on you. Everett didn't pull away, though his instinct was to do exactly that. You've done your part. Getting that intelligence, finding this place. Most people would have given up, accepted the lie. Not about my daughter, she said fiercely. Never about Emma. A moment of understanding passed between them. The recognition of two people who had each, in their own way, refused to accept the narratives forced upon them by powers beyond their control. Everett finally withdrew his hand, uncomfortable with the connection forming between them. Attachments were dangerous in his world. They clouded judgment, created vulnerabilities, led to mistakes, and mistakes got people killed. Try to rest, he told her, standing. Tomorrow will be long for both of us. He moved to his usual chair by the fire, pulling out his weapons to check them one final time. Catherine watched him, her gaze thoughtful. You never told me what brought you to these mountains, she said quietly. And not just the mission that went wrong, but why here specifically? Everett's hands continued their mechanical work, field stripping his sidearm with practiced movements. Does it matter? I think it might, she replied, to understand who you are now. He was silent for so long, Catherine thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and distant. My grandfather had a cabin in these mountains. Brought me here summers when I was a boy, before he died. Only place I ever felt safe. The admission seemed to cost him something. After everything fell apart, I remembered this range, came here, built this place with my own hands. Your sanctuary, Catherine observed. Everett reassembled the weapon with quick, precise movements. Something like that. And now, I've invaded it, she said softly. He brought the world back to your door. His eyes met hers across the room. You didn't bring it. It was always out there. I just pretended it wasn't. The honesty in that statement hung between them, raw and unvarnished. Catherine nodded slowly, understanding what it had cost this solitary man to acknowledge that truth, that no sanctuary was ever truly complete, no isolation ever perfect. In for what it's worth, she said after a moment, I'm glad it was your trapline I fell into. A ghost of a smile touched Everett's lips. Get some sleep, Catherine. Tomorrow we find out if your daughter is really there. She settled back against the pillows, the wooden doll clutched to her chest. And if she is, then we bring her home, he said simply, as if it were the most natural promise in the world for a man who had sworn never to make promises again. Outside, the mountain winds howled, carrying the threat of another storm. Inside, plans were laid, weapons prepared, and hopes cautiously kindled. Tomorrow would bring either reunion or devastating confirmation that Catherine's journey had been in vain. Neither of them mentioned the third possibility, that Everett might not return at all. Some fears were better left unspoken in the quiet hours before dawn. The medical supply truck followed a predictable route through the winding mountain roads, its driver oblivious to the figure waiting in the dense pine forest. Everett had positioned himself at a natural bottleneck, a sharp curve where the vehicle would need to slow considerably. The fresh snow muffled his movements as he prepared, checking his gear one final time. Dark tactical clothing beneath a white snow camouflage cover, face blackened with ash from his fireplace. Weapons secured but accessible. The security keycard from Catherine tucked safely in an inner pocket. He was as ready as he could be. The distant rumble of an engine broke the morning silence. Everett tensed, years of training taking over as his body shifted into the familiar state of hyper-awareness that had once been as natural as breathing. Time seemed to slow as the white panel truck came into view. Mountain medical supplies emblazoned on its side, a convincing cover for whatever sinister cargo it actually transported. As the vehicle slowed for the curve, Everett made his move. 3 rapid steps brought him onto the road directly in the truck's path, arm raised in an urgent halting gesture. The driver, a middle-aged man in a company uniform, hit the brakes in surprise, the truck sliding slightly on the icy road before stopping just feet from Everett. The window rolled down, the driver's face a mixture of annoyance and concern. "What the hell, man? You trying to get yourself killed?" Everett approached, affecting a panicked demeanor. "Thank God you stopped. My wife, she's hurt bad, just down the slope. Fell while we were hiking. I can't carry her up to the road alone." The driver's expression shifted to suspicion. "There's no hiking trails open this time of year." "We're not tourists," Everett improvised smoothly. "Local researchers, tracking mountain lion populations." "Please, she's bleeding badly." Hesitation, then conscience won out. "I've got a first aid kit," the driver said, reaching for his door handle. "Let me see what I can do." The moment the man stepped from the truck, Everett struck. One precise blow to the side of the neck, catching the driver as he collapsed. He dragged the unconscious form quickly into the trees, binding and gagging him efficiently before covering him with a thermal blanket. The man would be cold when he woke, but alive. Everett had no quarrel with delivery drivers just doing their jobs. After changing into the driver's uniform and cap, Everett returned to the truck. A quick search revealed the expected paperwork: delivery manifest, facility access pass, employee ID. The cab smelled of coffee and cigarettes, with a family photo stuck to the dashboard. The driver with a woman and teenage boy, all smiling at some beach vacation. Everett pushed down the unwelcome flicker of guilt. This man was collateral damage in a larger mission, nothing more. He would survive, unlike the children inside that facility if no one intervened. The drive to the research station took less than 15 minutes. As the camouflaged entrance came into view, Everett adjusted the cap lower over his eyes and forced his posture into a casual slouch, mimicking the bored demeanor of someone making a routine delivery. The guard at the checkpoint was young, barely out of his 20s, with the over-alert posture of someone still new to security work. "ID and manifest," he demanded, hand resting near his sidearm. Everett produced the documents with just the right amount of weary impatience. The guard scanned them briefly, then used a handheld device to check the truck's registration against their system. "You're not Rogers," the guard said suddenly, looking up from his device with narrowed eyes. "Rogers is out with the flu," Everett replied without missing a beat. "I'm Jenkins from the West Side Depot. Got called in last minute." He gestured at the paperwork. "Should be noted on the manifest amendment." The guard frowned, checking again. Everett tensed imperceptibly, ready to react if the deception failed. But after a moment, the young man nodded. "Yeah, here it is. Sorry about that." He handed back the documents. "Need to be thorough, you know how it is. Pull up to the service bay, usual procedure." Everett nodded, keeping his expression neutral as relief washed through him. First hurdle cleared. He drove slowly through the checkpoint, following the curved access road that led to the facility's main structure, now visible as a modern, low-profile building partially embedded in the mountainside. Its architecture was deliberately understated, Nothing that would attract attention from aerial observation. The service bay doors opened automatically as he approached. Everett drove inside, parking where indicated by a uniformed staff member who immediately approached with a digital tablet. "Mountain Medical Delivery," Everett said, handing over the manifest. "Got the weekly shipment plus those special orders from Dr. Mercer." The staff member, his badge identified him as Turner, Logistics, nodded without looking up from the tablet. "They've been waiting for those. Procedures start in an hour." He made a notation. "Back the truck up to Bay 3. We'll unload there." Everett complied, maneuvering the vehicle into position. As he stepped out, he took in his surroundings with a trained eye, matching them against the mental map he'd constructed. Service corridor leading deeper into the facility. Security cameras at key junctions. Staff moving with purpose, paying little attention to yet another delivery driver. "Oh, you can wait in the break room while we unload," Turner said, gesturing toward a side door. "Coffee's decent. Shouldn't take more than 30 minutes. "Actually," Everett replied, "I've got special handling instructions for the Mercer supplies. Need to deliver those personally, get a signature." Turner looked annoyed. "That's not protocol." "New policy," Everett said with a shrug. "After that mix-up last month with the pediatric samples, you must have gotten the memo." The lie worked. Turner's expression shifted to one of resignation. "Fine, but you'll need an escort. Hold on." He called over another staff member, a young woman with a security badge. "Martinez, take this guy to Dr. Mercer's lab with the special orders. Make sure he gets the signature, then bring him back." Martinez nodded, clearly unhappy with the assignment. "This way," she said curtly to Everett. "Perfect. With an official escort, he would have access deeper into the facility than he could have managed alone." Everett retrieved a sealed container from the truck, labeled with official-looking medical warnings, and followed Martinez through a series of security doors, each requiring her badge for access. They moved deeper into the complex, passing laboratories, offices, and monitoring stations. Everett memorized the layout, noting security measures and potential extraction routes. The facility was larger than it appeared from outside, with multiple levels extending into the mountainside. "So, what's in the box?" Martinez asked as they entered an elevator. "Honestly, no idea," Everett replied, maintaining his cover. "They don't tell drivers anything, just where to deliver." She nodded, accepting this as normal. "And level B," she said to the elevator. The car began to descend. Level B, according to Catherine's information, the medical wing was on this level, as was the children's containment area. Everett's pulse quickened slightly, though nothing in his external demeanor changed. The elevator doors opened onto a sterile white corridor. The difference was immediately apparent. Higher security, more cameras, staff in medical scrubs rather than standard uniforms. Martinez led him past several closed doors, each with electronic locks and observation windows. Through one such window, Everett caught a glimpse that froze his blood. A child, perhaps 8 years old, sitting on an examination table while a white-coated doctor attached monitoring equipment. The child's expression was vacant, resigned, devoid of the fear or resistance one would expect. Drugged, Everett realized, or conditioned through repeated procedures. "In here," Martinez said, stopping at a door marked Dr. Mercer, Research Director. She swiped her badge and the door slid open. The office beyond was empty, a sleek, modern space with advanced medical equipment and a wall of monitors displaying data Everett couldn't interpret. Martinez frowned. "He should be here. The procedures are scheduled for 10. Everett set down the container, mind racing. This unexpected development could either ruin his plan or provide an opportunity. Maybe he's with the subjects already. "I really need this signature." Martinez checked her watch. "They should be bringing them up from containment now. We can check the examination rooms." She hesitated, then added, "Don't touch anything in here. This stuff is classified." She led him back into the corridor and around a corner where they encountered a group of staff escorting 5 children from an elevator. Each child wore identical grey clothing like hospital gowns, but more substantial. Each moved with the same eerie docility Everett had observed through the window, and there, third in line, was a little girl with dark hair and eyes that matched the photograph Catherine had shown him. Emma. She looked thinner, paler, her expression blank, but unmistakably the same child. Around her wrist was a medical bracelet with an identification number rather than a name. Everett forced himself to appear disinterested, just another staff member going about his business. Inside, his mind raced, recalculating his plan. Emma was here, confirmed, but extracting her now, in a hallway surrounded by staff, was impossible. "Doctor, Mercer's probably in exam room 1, getting set up," Martinez said, oblivious to Everett's internal turmoil. "Let's check there first." As they turned to follow the children, Everett made a split-second decision. Falling slightly behind Martinez, he reached into his pocket and activated the device he'd prepared, a simple signal jammer that would disrupt the facility's electronic systems for approximately 3 minutes. Not long, but hopefully enough. The lights flickered, then emergency lighting engaged, dimmer, casting shadows. Alarms began to sound, and the security doors along the corridor slid shut automatically, emergency protocols engaging. "What the hell?" Martinez exclaimed, turning back toward him. But Everett was already moving, a precisely aimed strike, rendering her unconscious before she could react. In the confusion of flashing lights and alarms, he moved swiftly toward the group of children, now stopped in the corridor as staff attempted to determine what was happening. Time was measured in heartbeats now, 20 seconds already gone. Reaching the group, Everett addressed the nearest staff member with authority. "Security Protocol Alpha, get these subjects back to containment immediately." The command in his voice worked. 2 of the 3 staff members began herding the children back toward the elevator, while the third protested, but Dr. Mercer specifically requested, "Override from security," Everett interrupted sharply. "I'll take this one for immediate evaluation." He grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her aside. "Move, now!" The girl offered no resistance, moving where directed with the same vacant compliance. The remaining staff member hesitated, then followed the others as a new alarm began to sound, this one louder, more urgent. 1 minute gone. The jammer would fail soon, and the facility would realize what was happening. Everett knelt quickly before Emma, looking into her blank eyes. Emma Reeves, I'm here to take you to your mother." Something flickered in those dark eyes, a spark of recognition, quickly suppressed. But it was there, somewhere beneath whatever conditioning or medication they'd subjected her to. Catherine's daughter was still present. Time was running out. Everett lifted the child into his arms and ran. The service corridor was chaos. Flashing emergency lights, staff rushing in different directions, security personnel attempting to establish order. Everett moved against the flow, Emma held securely in his arms, projecting an air of authority that kept most from questioning him. When a security guard moved to intercept them, Everett barked, "Medical emergency! This subject is having a reaction to the new protocol." The guard hesitated just long enough for Everett to push past, continuing toward the service bay where he'd entered. Emma remained unnervingly quiet, her small body tense but unresisting, her eyes moving rapidly as if struggling to process what was happening. The jammer had exceeded its expected duration, but Everett knew it wouldn't last much longer. Already, some systems were coming back online, security doors beginning to function again. His window was closing fast. They reached the service bay just as the main systems reset. Alarms changed tone. and a mechanical voice announced, "Security breach detected, level B. All personnel initiate containment protocol." The logistics staff had abandoned the area during the alarm, leaving the delivery truck unattended. Everett placed Emma quickly in the passenger seat, securing her with the seatbelt. "Stay here," he instructed firmly. "Don't move." She nodded once, that same vacant compliance that turned his stomach. Everett slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and accelerated toward the exit, not bothering with subtlety now. The service bay doors were closing automatically as part of the lockdown procedure, leaving only a narrowing gap. Everett floored the accelerator, the truck's engine roaring as they hurtled toward the shrinking opening. Metal scraped against metal as they squeezed through, the truck's side panels screaming in protest. Then they were out, speeding down the access road toward the main gate. In the rearview mirror, Everett could see security personnel emerging from the facility, weapons drawn. The checkpoint loomed ahead, the guard already alerted to the situation, raising his weapon. Everett didn't slow. The truck smashed through the barrier at full speed, the impact jarring, but not enough to stop their momentum. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets pinging off the truck's frame. Everett took the first turn in the road at dangerous speed, putting the bulk of the mountain between them and their pursuers. Only then did he glance at Emma, concerned the violence might have terrified her. Her expression hadn't changed. No fear, no excitement, just that same eerie blankness, as if none of this were real to her. "Emma," he said, keeping his voice gentle despite the urgency of their situation. "My name is Everett. I'm taking you to your mother. Do you understand?" Her head turned slowly toward him. "Mother is deceased," she said mechanically. "There was an accident." The clinical detachment in the child's voice sent chills down Everett's spine. "That's what they told you," he replied carefully. "But it wasn't true. Your mother is alive. She's been looking for you." Something flickered in those dark eyes again, confusion, perhaps, or the first stirrings of doubt in whatever narrative she'd been fed. "That is not possible," she stated, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "It is possible," Everett insisted, taking a sharp turn onto a logging road that wasn't on most maps. "They lied to you, Emma, just like they lied to your mother about you being dead." The girl's brow furrowed slightly, the first real expression he'd seen on her face. Her hand moved unconsciously to touch the pocket of her grey uniform, where something made a small bulge. "What's that?" Everett asked, nodding toward her pocket while scanning the road ahead for signs of pursuit. Emma hesitated, then slowly withdrew a small object. It was a crude wooden figure, roughly carved, the mate to the doll Catherine had been clutching. "This is unauthorized," she said quietly. "They do not know I kept it." Everett felt a surge of hope. Somewhere beneath the conditioning, Emma Reeves was still fighting. "Your mother has the other one," he told her. "The doll. She kept it all this time, looking for you." The girl's eyes widened slightly. Her fingers tightened around the wooden figure. "Mother made them," she whispered, and for the first time emotion crept into her voice, a tremulous uncertainty like ice beginning to crack. Before they took her. Before they erased her identity and turned her into a numbered subject. Before they tried to sever the connection between mother and child. "Yes," Everett confirmed, his voice softening despite the danger still pressing at their backs. "And she never stopped looking for you. Never believed you were dead." Emma stared at the wooden figure in her palm, a war clearly raging behind those dark eyes. Whatever they had done to her, drugs, conditioning, psychological manipulation, it was fighting against the tangible proof of her past, her identity, her connection to someone who loved her. The logging road narrowed, trees pressing close on either side. Everett knew they couldn't continue in the truck much longer. It was too visible, too easy to track. Soon they would need to abandon it and continue on foot through the forest, a grueling journey back to the cabin that would be challenging enough for him, let alone a young child who might not be capable of cooperating, who might still be more loyal to her captors than to the mother she'd been told was dead. "Emma," he said gently, "we're going to have to walk soon. Through the snow, through the forest, it will be hard. Are you strong enough for that?" She looked up at him, and something shifted in her expression, a flash of the real child beneath the conditioning. "I am Subject 17, she said, but the words sounded hollow now, rehearsed. "I am part of important work." "You are Emma Reeves," Everett corrected firmly. "You are a little girl who was taken from her mother, and I'm bringing you home." He pulled the truck to a stop in a small clearing, concealed from the main road by dense pine forest. In the distance, he could hear the faint sound of helicopters, the facility mobilizing aerial search. They had less time than he'd hoped. "We go on foot from here," he told her, reaching across to unbuckle her seatbelt. "Stay close to me. Do exactly as I say." "Can you do that?" Emma nodded, still clutching the wooden figure. As Everett helped her from the truck, he noticed she was wearing only thin slippers, completely inadequate for the deep snow and freezing temperatures. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his outer jacket and wrapped it around her small frame. It engulfed her, but would provide some protection against the elements. Then he knelt and removed his gloves, placing them on her tiny hands. "We need to move quickly," he explained, hoisting her onto his back. "Hold tight around my neck." Her arms circled him obediently, her weight negligible after years of carrying heavy packs through these mountains. Everett set off at a steady jog, choosing a route that would be difficult to track, across rocky outcroppings where the snow was thin, through icy streams that would hide their scent from tracking dogs. The helicopters grew louder, then faded as they searched in the wrong direction. Everett had chosen his escape route carefully, using the terrain to his advantage, but the journey was long, the temperature dropping as afternoon waned toward evening, and he could feel Emma shivering against his back despite the jacket. "Talk to me, Emma," he encouraged, as they paused briefly for him to catch his breath. "Stay awake. Tell me what you remember about your mother." The girl was silent for so long, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a small voice, she sang at night, by my bed. The simplicity of the memory, offered like a precious gift, twisted something in Everett's chest. "What did she sing?" "A song about a river," Emma replied, her voice distant, "and stars that know the way home. A lullaby, a mother singing her child to sleep, a moment of safety and love that had survived whatever horrors the facility had inflicted." "She still sings it," Everett told her, resuming their trek through the deepening shadows of the forest. "I've heard her. When she thinks I'm not listening." Another long silence. Then, "Is she really alive?" The question contained so much: hope, fear, the fragile beginnings of trust. Everett adjusted her weight on his back, feeling the responsibility of his answer. "Yes," he said firmly, "and she never stopped looking for you. Not for a single day." Emma's arms tightened around his neck, not in fear, but in something like determination. "Then I want to go home," she whispered, the words barely audible against the wind that had begun to rise, carrying the promise of another storm. Everett quickened his pace. The cabin was still hours away, and night was falling fast. Behind them, the facility would be organizing a more thorough search, expanding outward from the abandoned truck. Ahead lay miles of difficult terrain, a damaged child, and a mother waiting with a hope so fragile it might shatter at the slightest disappointment. For the first time in years, Everett Blackwood prayed, not for himself, but for the small life entrusted to him, for the strength to bring her home, for the chance to make one thing right in a world that had gone so terribly wrong. The wind carried his unspoken words away into the gathering darkness. Night fell like a heavy curtain, bringing with it a bitter cold that seeped through clothing and skin to settle in the bones. Everett pushed on through the darkness, navigating by memory and instinct more than sight. Emma had fallen silent on his back, her breathing shallow but steady, her small body occasionally trembling with cold despite the jacket wrapped around her. The forest was alive with sounds that most would find threatening, the distant howl of wolves, the cracking of branches under the weight of snow, the eerie whistle of wind through bare trees. To Everett, these were the familiar voices of the mountain, reassuring in their constancy. But tonight they carried new warnings. The wolves were restless, moving in patterns that suggested they'd been disturbed. Something, or someone, was disrupting the natural rhythm of the wilderness. Searchers. The facility had expanded their hunt beyond the immediate area of the abandoned truck. Everett changed course, angling away from the most likely search patterns, taking them deeper into terrain so challenging that few would willingly follow. The going was slower here, the snow deeper, the slopes treacherous with hidden ice beneath the powder. "Emma," he said softly, jostling her gently, "stay with me. Talk to me." She stirred against his back. "Cold," she murmured, her voice small and distant. "I know. We'll rest soon, get warm. But I need you to stay awake." He adjusted her weight, trying to shield her better from the wind. "Tell me something you remember, something from before." A long silence. Then, "I had a cat, orange stripes. His name was Pancake." The normality of it struck Everett like a physical blow. Before she was Subject 17, before she was an experiment, she was just a little girl with a cat named Pancake. "That's a good name for an orange cat," he replied, forcing his voice to remain steady as he navigated a particularly steep incline. "What happened to him?" "He stayed with Grandma when we moved," Emma said, the words slurring slightly with cold and exhaustion. "But he ran away. Mom said we'd get another cat when we were settled." Pieces of a life interrupted, promises never fulfilled. Everett felt a surge of anger toward the people who had stolen this child's normal existence, who had replaced cats and kindergarten with subject numbers and medical procedures. They continued in silence for another hour, the temperature dropping further as clouds obscured the moon and stars. Everett knew they couldn't go much further without rest. Emma's responses were becoming more delayed, her shivering more pronounced, early signs of hypothermia. Just ahead, he spotted what he needed, a rock outcropping creating a natural shelter, partially protected from the wind and hidden from aerial observation. Not ideal, but sufficient for a brief respite. "We're stopping for a little while," he told Emma as he carefully set her down in the most sheltered spot. "Need to warm you up." From his pack, he extracted an emergency thermal blanket, wrapping it securely around her small form. Then he quickly gathered what dry kindling he could find, using skills honed over years in the wilderness to start a small, nearly smokeless fire despite the challenging conditions. As the flames caught and grew, casting flickering light across the snow, Everett finally got a clear look at Emma's face. The vacant expression had given way to exhaustion and confusion. But there was awareness in her eyes now, awareness and fear. "They'll be angry," she whispered, staring into the fire. "Dr. Mercer says compliance is necessary for the work." Everett crouched beside her, adding small branches to the growing flames. "What work, Emma? What were they doing to you?" She frowned, a child trying to explain something too complex for her understanding. "Making us better. Special. They put medicine in us and then test how we respond." Her small hand moved unconsciously to the crook of her arm, where Everett now noticed multiple injection marks, some fresh, some scarred over. "Some kids get sick from the medicine. They go away. Dr. Mercer says they're helping the work in a different way." The implications turned Everett's stomach. Human experimentation on children, with those who got sick, likely becoming autopsy subjects. It was monstrous beyond comprehension. "That's not making you better, Emma," he said gently. "That's hurting you, using you. Your mother would never have allowed it if she'd known." Emma's brow furrowed. "But Dr. Mercer said my mother gave permission, said she wanted me to be special." "He lied," Everett replied firmly. "Your mother has been looking for you since they took you. She never stopped searching, never gave up hope of finding you." The girl stared at him, doubt and hope warring in her expression. "Really? Really?" he confirmed. "That's why I went to get you. She found out where you were, but she was hurt and couldn't go herself. So I went for her." Emma absorbed this, her eyes never leaving his face as if searching for deception. Whatever they had done to her at the facility, they hadn't completely destroyed her ability to recognize truth from lies. "What's she like?" she finally asked, her voice small but eager. "My mom. I remember some things, but they get fuzzy." Everett considered how to describe Catherine, her fierce determination, her unwavering hope, her vulnerability beneath the strength. "She's brave," he said simply. "Braver than anyone I've known, and she loves you more than anything in this world." Emma nodded slowly, as if this aligned with some deep, uncorrupted memory. Her hand slipped into her pocket, withdrawing the small wooden figure. "She made these," she said, a statement rather than a question, "for my birthday, a matching pair." "Yes," Everett confirmed. "She has the other one. She showed it to me." The girl studied the crude carving in the firelight, her finger tracing its familiar contours. "They let me keep it at first, said it would help with the transition. Then they took it away during integration phase." Her voice took on a mechanical quality as she recited terms she'd clearly heard many times. "But I hid another one. They didn't know about the second one." Small acts of resistance. A child preserving what she could of her identity. Her connection to the mother she'd been told was dead. "You were very clever," Everett told her, genuine admiration in his voice. "And very brave." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Perhaps the first real smile since her captivity began. It transformed her face, showing glimpses of the child she'd been before. The child she might be again, with time and care. The fire had burned down to embers, having served its purpose of providing temporary warmth. Everett checked his watch. They'd rested longer than he'd intended, but Emma had needed it. Now they had to move again, cover as much ground as possible before dawn brought renewed aerial searches. "Time to go," he said, extinguishing the fire completely and erasing all signs of their presence. We've still got a long way." Emma stood obediently, swaying slightly with fatigue but visibly stronger than before. "How far to my mom?" "A few more hours," Everett replied, kneeling so she could climb onto his back again. "Think you can hold on that long?" She nodded against his shoulder, arms circling his neck with more purpose than before. As they set off into the darkness, Everett felt her small hand slip into his jacket pocket, securing the wooden figure where it wouldn't be lost. The night grew colder as they traveled, but Everett's pace never faltered. He moved with the confidence of a man on his own territory, using the landscape to their advantage, keeping to areas where the tree canopy would hide them from above, avoiding open spaces where tracks would be visible, choosing paths that would challenge any pursuers. Twice they heard helicopters in the distance, searchlights cutting through the night, but each time the aircraft moved in different directions, their patterns suggesting a widening search rather than a targeted pursuit. The facility had resources, but they were searching a vast wilderness with limited intelligence. The advantage, for now, remained with the mountain man and his small charge. Emma drifted between wakefulness and exhausted half-sleep, occasionally murmuring questions or observations. Each coherent word marked a small victory, her mind gradually emerging from whatever fog the facility's treatments had imposed. The stars are different, she noted during one clear moment, gazing up at the brilliant canopy visible through a break in the trees. How so? Everett asked, partly to keep her engaged, partly out of genuine curiosity. We're brighter, she replied simply. At the facility, we only saw stars through windows. Special privilege for good behavior during procedures. Her voice took on that clinical tone again, reciting rules that had been drilled into her. But these are brighter and more. That's because there's no artificial light out here, Everett explained. Nothing to dim them. This is how stars are supposed to look. Emma was quiet for a moment, contemplating this. I remember, she finally said, so softly he almost missed it. Mom and I used to watch stars on our apartment roof. She taught me constellations. Another piece of herself reclaimed from the fog. Everett felt a surge of hope that perhaps the damage wasn't as permanent as he'd feared. With time, with love, with patience, perhaps Emma Reeves could find her way back to herself. They crested a ridge just as the eastern sky began to lighten imperceptibly. Not dawn yet, but the first hint that night would eventually yield. In the valley below, barely visible through the trees, a single light glowed. The cabin. They had made it. Almost there, Everett told Emma, who had fallen into an exhausted doze against his shoulder. Almost home. He wasn't sure if she heard him, or what home might mean to a child whose world had been so thoroughly dismantled and reconstructed. But as they began the final descent toward the waiting light, he felt her stir, her arms tightening around his neck. Is she waiting? Emma whispered, fear and hope mingled in her voice. Yes, Everett assured her, his own voice rough with exhaustion and emotion he couldn't fully name. She's waiting. She's always been waiting. Catherine had not slept. Despite the pain in her leg and the exhaustion pulling at her limbs, she had remained awake through the long night, tending the fire, watching the window, straining to hear any sound above the moaning wind. The hours stretched like years, each minute an exercise in hope and dread. She had moved herself to the table, the map spread before her, Emma's doll propped against a cup as if keeping vigil alongside her. The wooden figure stared back with its simple painted eyes, a crude representation of the child Catherine had feared she might never see again. When the soft crunch of footsteps finally broke the pre-dawn silence, Catherine's heart stuttered in her chest. She reached for the rifle Everett had left for her, hands steady despite the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. The footsteps paused outside the door. A moment of silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then the latch lifted, and Everett stepped through, snow dusting his shoulders, exhaustion carved into the lines of his face. Alone. Catherine's heart plummeted, the hope she'd nurtured through the endless night crumbling to ash. But before grief could fully take hold, Everett stepped aside, revealing the small figure behind him, a little girl in a grey uniform swimming in Everett's oversized jacket, dark eyes wide with uncertainty, one hand clutching a wooden figure identical to the one on the table. Emma. Catherine breathed, the name a prayer, a benediction, a miracle. The girl stood frozen, staring at the woman she'd been told was dead. Recognition and confusion warred in her expression, her conditioning battling against the evidence of her own eyes, her own memory. Mom? The word emerged tentative, questioning, as if she feared trusting her own perception. Catherine struggled to stand, forgetting her broken leg in the overwhelming need to reach her daughter. Pain shot through her as she collapsed back into the chair, a sob escaping her lips, not from physical agony, but from the sheer force of emotion too powerful to contain. Emma flinched at the sound, taking a half step back toward Everett, who placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. "She's hurt her leg. That's why she couldn't come find you herself." The girl hesitated, her gaze fixed on Catherine's face, searching for confirmation of a truth her heart recognized, but her mind had been taught to reject. "I sang to you," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "Every night, a song about a river and stars that know the way home." Something shifted in Emma's expression, a crack in the wall they'd built around her true self. "You braided my hair with ribbons," she whispered. "Pink ones, with butterflies." Catherine nodded, tears streaming freely now. "And you had a cat named Pancake who ran away when we moved." The final piece clicked into place. Emma took one tentative step forward, then another, until she stood beside Catherine's chair, close enough to touch, but still holding back, suspended between past and present, between truth and lies. With trembling hands, Catherine held out the wooden doll from the table. "I kept her safe," she said simply, "waiting for you to come back." Emma looked down at the matching figure in her own hand, then back at her mother. "I kept mine too," she replied. "They didn't know about the second one." It was such a small thing, a child's secret, a tiny act of rebellion, but in that moment, it became everything, proof that Emma Reeves had survived beneath the identity they'd tried to impose on her, that some essential core of her being had remained inviolate despite all they'd done. Catherine opened her arms, and the last of Emma's hesitation crumbled. She fell into her mother's embrace with a small, broken sound that was half sob, half sigh of relief. Catherine's arms closed around her daughter, holding her as if she might disappear again at any moment, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her small body after so many months of emptiness. Everett moved quietly to the fire, adding logs, giving mother and daughter what privacy he could in the confined space of the cabin. His body ached with exhaustion, but something deeper than physical weariness kept him alert. They weren't safe yet. The facility would be expanding their search, and eventually they would think to check the homes of local residents, even reclusive ones. But for this moment, this precious, fragile moment, he allowed himself to witness the reunion he had helped create. After years of carrying the weight of those he couldn't save, the sight of Emma in her mother's arms was like cool water on a burn too long untreated. Catherine looked up, meeting his eyes over her daughter's head, tears still streaming down her face. No words could adequately express what passed between them in that gaze. Gratitude, yes, but something more profound, a recognition, a connection forged in fire. Emma finally pulled back slightly, looking up at her mother with eyes that seemed older than her years, but held a spark of the child she'd been before. "They said you were dead," she said, her voice small but steady, "that you didn't want me anymore." "Never," Catherine replied fiercely. "I never stopped looking for you, never stopped believing you were alive. They lied to both of us, tried to keep us apart, but we found each other." Emma nodded slowly, processing this. "They put medicine in me," she confided, rolling up her sleeve to reveal the injection marks. "And they said it would make me special, important to their work." Catherine gently traced the marks with her finger, medical training and maternal instinct warring in her expression. "Do you know what kind of medicine? What it was for?" Emma shook her head. "Dr. Mercer said it was classified. Only the special children got it." Her brow furrowed. "Some of them got sick after. They didn't come back." Catherine and Everett exchanged a grim look over Emma's head. Whatever the facility was doing, it involved experimental treatments with potentially fatal outcomes. Children who didn't survive becoming subjects for further study. "We need to get her blood tested," Catherine said to Everett, professional concern momentarily overriding emotion. "Figure out what they were giving her, monitor for side effects." "First we need to get you both off this mountain," Everett replied, checking his watch. "The facility will widen their search once they realize she's not in the immediate area. We have maybe 12 hours before they start checking residences." Catherine nodded, understanding the urgency. "Where can we go?" "They'll be watching hospitals, police stations, anywhere official we might seek help." Everett moved to the window, scanning the brightening landscape outside. "I have a contact, someone from before. He operates outside official channels, has resources, medical training." "Can he be trusted?" Catherine asked, arms tightening protectively around Emma. A ghost of a smile touched Everett's lips. "No, but he owes me. And he hates government black ops more than he hates anything else." Emma had been listening to this exchange with the focused attention of a child accustomed to gathering information for survival. "The bad people will come here?" she asked, fear edging back into her voice. Everett crouched to her eye level, his expression gentle but serious. "Eventually. But we'll be gone before they do. I know these mountains better than anyone. I can get you and your mum somewhere safe." Emma studied him with those old soul eyes. "You saved me," she stated simply. "Your mum saved you," Everett corrected. "She never gave up looking. I just helped with the last part." Emma shook her head with surprising firmness. "Both," she insisted, then with the directness only a child could manage. "Are you coming with us after?" The question caught Everett off guard. He'd been focused entirely on extraction and immediate safety, not on what came after. His gaze flickered to Catherine, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. "Let's focus on getting off the mountain first," he deflected, standing to check his weapons and gear. "We'll figure out the rest later." But Emma's question had opened a door he'd kept firmly closed for 3 years. What came after? Return to his solitary existence on the mountain. Pretend that Catherine and Emma Reeves had never crashed into his carefully constructed isolation. The facility would know he was involved now. His sanctuary was compromised, regardless of what he chose. And something had shifted within him during those hours, carrying Emma through the darkness. Something he wasn't yet ready to examine too closely. Catherine seemed to sense his internal conflict. "And one step at a time," she agreed, smoothing Emma's tangled hair. "Right now, we need food, rest, and a plan to get down the mountain without being spotted." Everett nodded gratefully and moved to the stove to prepare a simple meal. Emma remained close to her mother, as if afraid she might disappear if they lost physical contact. Catherine winced occasionally when she moved her injured leg, but her focus remained entirely on her daughter, drinking in every detail of the child she'd feared lost forever. As daylight strengthened outside the cabin windows, Everett watched mother and daughter together, Catherine patiently answering Emma's hesitant questions, Emma gradually relaxing into the reality of her mother's presence. The wooden dolls sat side by side on the table, reunited like their owners. Despite the danger still pressing in from all sides, despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead, Everett felt something unfamiliar and almost forgotten stirring within him. It took him a moment to recognize it, so long had it been absent from his life. Hope, small and fragile, but undeniably present. The mountain had taught him many things in his years of solitude: survival, self-reliance, the peace that comes from separation. But Catherine and Emma Reeves had taught him something the mountain could not: that some connections were worth the risk they carried. Some battles, however dangerous, were worth fighting, and some debts, though they could never truly be repaid, could perhaps be balanced by new beginnings. They left the cabin as the sun reached its zenith, timing their departure to coincide with the period when aerial searches would be hampered by glare off the snow. Everett had spent the morning making preparations, gathering essential supplies, mapping their route, erasing any evidence of Emma's presence that might lead pursuers to their destination. Catherine's broken leg presented the greatest challenge. She could not walk, and carrying both her and Emma through the difficult terrain would be impossible, even for someone of Everett's strength and endurance. The solution came in the form of a crude sled Everett constructed from materials around the cabin. Sturdy pine boards, rope from his trapping supplies, canvas tarp for a base. not elegant, but functional enough to transport Catherine over snow. It's not exactly first-class travel," he apologized as he helped her onto the makeshift conveyance. Catherine managed a smile despite the pain. "After everything else, a little discomfort seems insignificant." Emma had been quiet all morning, watching the preparations with the wary attention of a child who had learned that safety was temporary at best. She stayed close to her mother, occasionally touching Catherine's arm or hand as if to reassure herself that she was real. As Everett secured the last of their supplies, Emma approached him, the wooden doll clutched in her hand. "Will the bad people find your house?" she asked softly. Everett paused in his work, considering how to answer. The truth was that the facility would almost certainly trace them here eventually. His carefully constructed sanctuary would be compromised, investigated, perhaps destroyed in the search for evidence. "Probably," he admitted, seeing no point in lying to a child who had already endured too many falsehoods. "But it's just a house. Things can be rebuilt." Emma nodded seriously, processing this. Then she held out the wooden figure. "You should take this," she said. "For luck." The unexpected gesture caught Everett off guard. He glanced at Catherine, who watched with glistening eyes, then back to the small hand offering this treasured possession. "That's your special doll," he said gently, "the one you kept safe all this time." Emma shook her head. "Mom has the other one. We're together now." She pressed the figure into his palm with surprising firmness. "You need it more." Everett's throat tightened as he closed his fingers around the small wooden form. Such a simple thing, roughly carved wood, faded paint, worn smooth by a child's worried touch, yet in that moment it felt like the most valuable gift he'd ever received. "Thank you," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "I'll keep it safe." With final preparations complete, they set out into the pristine winter landscape, Everett pulling the sled carrying Catherine, Emma walking beside them, bundled in layers of clothing scaled down from Everett's spares. They kept to the densest parts of the forest, where the tree canopy would shield them from aerial observation and the terrain would challenge any ground pursuit. Their destination lay 12 miles southeast, a remote hunting cabin owned by Everett's contact, positioned near a seldom-used fire road where a vehicle could reach them. From there, they would have options that weren't available on the isolated mountaintop. The journey was slow and arduous. Catherine endured the jarring ride without complaint, though Everett could see the pain etched in the lines around her eyes. Emma trudged through the snow with determination that belied her age and size, only accepting Everett's offer to carry her when the drifts grew too deep for her short legs to navigate. They stopped briefly at midday to rest and eat, sheltering in the lee of a massive fallen pine. As Catherine checked Emma's hands and feet for signs of frostbite, Everett scanned their back trail, alert for any indication they were being followed. "See anything?" Catherine asked quietly when Emma had moved a few steps away to examine an icicle hanging from a branch. Everett shook his head. "Not yet, but they'll have expanded the search perimeter by now. It's only a matter of time." She nodded, accepting this reality without fear. "What happens when we reach your contact's cabin?" "We call him on the secure line. He arranges transport to a safe location." Everett paused, then added, "From there, you'll have choices to make. About Emma, about what evidence you have against the facility, about your future." Catherine's gaze drifted to her daughter, who was now carefully breaking icicles and arranging them by size on a fallen log. Despite everything, despite the trauma and conditioning, moments of ordinary childhood curiosity still emerged. Resilient, irrepressible. "They'll never stop looking for her," Catherine said softly. "Will they?" Everett considered lying, offering false reassurance, but respected her too much for that. Not easily. Whatever they were doing to those children, it was important enough to create an elaborate cover-up. They won't abandon that investment without a fight. Then we'll need to disappear, she concluded, her voice steady despite the implications. New identities, new location, start over completely. My contact can help with that too, Everett assured her. He has resources, connections outside official channels. Catherine studied him, her perceptive gaze seeing more than he was comfortable revealing. And you? What will you do after? The question echoed Emma's from earlier. Everett busied himself repacking their supplies, avoiding her eyes. Go back to my life, I suppose. Rebuild somewhere new if necessary. Alone? The single word held a wealth of meaning. Before Everett could formulate a response, Emma returned, her small face serious. Someone's coming, she whispered. And I heard voices. Instantly alert, Everett motioned for silence, straining to hear what the child's keen ears had detected. For several heartbeats, there was nothing but the whisper of wind through pine needles. Then, faint but unmistakable, the crunch of snow under boots, the murmur of low voices. How far? He whispered to Emma. She pointed back the way they had come, past the big rock, where the trees get thicker. Less than half a mile behind them, moving quickly, Everett's mind raced through options, calculating distances, assessing risks. They couldn't outrun pursuers, not with Catherine injured and Emma's small legs slowing their pace. Fighting would endanger the very people he was trying to protect. There was only one choice. Take this, he said to Catherine, pressing his handgun into her palm. Head due southeast. Stay in the trees, follow the ridge. The cabin is marked on the map, red circle. My contact's name and the secure line number are written inside the compass case. Catherine's eyes widened in understanding and alarm. What are you doing? Buying you time, Everett replied, already unstrapping her from the sled. I'll lead them away, create a false trail, meet you at the cabin. No, she protested. That's too dangerous. They'll follow me, he interrupted firmly. That's the point. I know these mountains better than they ever could. I can lose them, circle back. Emma watched this exchange with the solemn understanding of a child who had seen too much of the adult world's darkness. You're going to distract the bad men, she said, not a question, but a statement of fact. Everett knelt before her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. Yes, so you and your mom can get somewhere safe. The girl nodded, her expression too serious for her years. Then, with a suddenness that startled him, she threw her arms around his neck in a fierce hug. Come back, she whispered fiercely in his ear. Promise. Everett hesitated, unwilling to make a promise he might not be able to keep. But the feel of those small arms around his neck, the trust implicit in the gesture, broke something open inside him that he'd thought permanently sealed. I promise, he found himself saying. I'll find you. He helped Catherine to her feet, supporting her weight as she balanced on her good leg. Their eyes met, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them in that brief moment. 48 hours, he said. If I'm not at the cabin by then, contact Burke. He'll get you somewhere safe permanently. Catherine nodded, her expression a complex mixture of fear, gratitude, and something deeper that neither of them had time to acknowledge. Be careful, she whispered. Everett adjusted the straps of his pack, checked his rifle, and nodded once. Southeast along the ridge. Don't stop until you reach the cabin. Then he was gone, moving quickly through the trees in the opposite direction, deliberately leaving clear tracks in the snow, an obvious trail for pursuers to follow. Catherine watched him disappear into the forest. The man who had saved her daughter, who had risked everything for strangers who crashed into his solitary existence. The man who was now drawing danger away from them at tremendous personal risk. Will he come back? Emma asked quietly. Her small hand finding Catherine's, Catherine squeezed her daughter's fingers, gazing at the empty space where Everett had vanished. Yes, she said, with conviction she wasn't entirely sure she felt. He promised. Together, they began their journey southeast, A mother with a broken leg, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch. A young child who had endured unimaginable trauma. Both carrying the wooden dolls that had somehow become symbols of their improbable reunion. Behind them, faintly, came the sound of pursuit changing direction, following the false trail Everett had laid. His diversion was working. For now, the afternoon stretched into evening, the forest growing darker around them as they struggled on. Emma helped guide her mother around obstacles, showing surprising strength and determination for one so young. Catherine fought through pain and exhaustion, driven by the fierce need to protect her child, to reach safety before their lead evaporated. As night fell completely, they reached the ridge Everett had described. Below, nestled in a small clearing, stood a cabin, rustic but solid, built to withstand the mountain winters. No lights burned in the windows, but its very presence felt like salvation after their grueling journey. Inside, they found basic supplies, food, water, first aid materials, a radio transmitter with a frequency noted beside it. Catherine secured the doors and windows, then tended to Emma, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep almost instantly on the cabin's single bed. Only then, watching her daughter's peaceful breathing, did Catherine allow herself to acknowledge the fear she'd been holding at bay, not for herself or Emma, but for the man who had made their reunion possible, the man who was somewhere in the darkness, alone, facing unknown dangers to protect them. She touched the wooden doll Emma still clutched even in sleep, its twin resting on the table beside the bed, two parts of a whole, separated but finally reunited. "Come back to us, Everett Blackwood," she whispered into the quiet cabin. "We're waiting." Outside, snow began to fall again, covering tracks, erasing evidence, transforming the landscape into an unwritten page. Somewhere in that vast whiteness, a solitary figure moved through the darkness, carrying nothing but weapons, survival gear, and a small wooden doll tucked safely in his pocket. The mountain kept its secrets and its promises beneath the endless falling snow,